Hey everybody, back here with part 2. Have to redo this because I just got a phone call from my sister, so that didn't help out too much. But where was I? Oh yeah. So where did I end it? Oh yeah, I ended at 166. Okay, that's why I ended. All right. Well, I was going to begin at 166. So, Ken Penders, this is what he had planned for 166. This is what he had planned. He entitled 166 Fallout, and this is what he had planned according to the detailed synthesis and summary. And I quote, "Sonic is racked with grief, feeling responsible for the death of Snively." So basically Ken Penders would have killed Snively off. But he would have done it in a heroic way. And drives everyone that much harder when preparing for the next mission. As the assignment unfolds, everyone becomes uneasy as the possibility dawns that Sonic could cross a line that he never did before. For the freedom fighters, this moral conundrum becomes even more difficult when it's discovered the enemy's latest plan could result in the extinction of every life form on Mobius. You know, that kind of sounds similar in some ways, you know, Sonic going to cross the line, if you will. Gee, I wonder who is currently doing that in their stories. Alright, continuing on, this is what Ken Penders had planned for 167. This is what he had planned for 167. This is what he had planned for 167, okay? 167, this is what he had planned. He entitled the issue New World Order. And like I said, this is what he had planned for 167, had he remained on the book. And I quote, "Sonic is finally informed of the duties of his new rank, Gentleman at Arms. His first task, accompany Princess Sally to Station Square as she sets up Nautol's first embassy in a foreign land. Naturally, there is some trouble before the group departs, including Sally's displeasure when Sonic's new rank means he can overrule her when it comes to security. In other words, if she feels, hey, I don't need you to be here with me, I'm fine, Sonic can say, nope, sorry, that's not your decision to make, that's mine, I gotta overrule you." Now continuing on, as Antoine's duties as the head of the Royal Guard conflict with his proposal to Bunny. So it sounds like a very interesting issue there. Basically Sally realizing that, hey, I may be a princess and I may be a freedom fighter, but now I don't even have authority over my own security. Interesting, huh? Alright, continuing on, this is what Ken Penders had planned for 168, and maybe even beyond that. Because he says in parentheses here, he says in parentheses that this story in 168 would have been a 16-page one issue, a 2-issue 11-page, or a 2-issue 16-page if it was spread over 2 issues. But this is the title of the story he had planned for 168, called Our Hedgehog in Station Square. Now that Princess Sally, Sonic, Tails, Rotor have arrived in Station Square for duration, Sonic finds getting around town is more awkward than he likes, thanks to Evil Sonic, aka Scourge, making the scene. But if Sonic can't provoke his doppelganger into a fight one way, perhaps scoring with Rouge might do the trick. Now only if Sally doesn't get into the act. And again, this is basically, and like I said, he basically had this plan for either one issue, 16 pages, or 2 issues with 11 pages, or 2 issues with 16 pages. So if it had been 2 issues, it would have been 22 to 32 pages altogether. Now, continuing on, this is a two-parter two 16-page issues, if you will, that he had planned for 169 and 170. This is a two-parter Ken Penders had planned for 169 and 170. And this is the detailed summary. And I quote, "Knuckles and the Chaotix show up at Station Square, meaning and spoiling for a fight with the group that attempted to invade Angel Island. Unfortunately, with the new Alliance pack in place between Knothole and Station Square, that puts Sonic on a collision course with the embattled Echidna." In other words, it's basically going to be another two-issue story, but centered around Sonic versus Knuckles kind of deal. And basically, that's what he ends here. And that is where he ends right there, with what he had planned for from his last two issues, which was, I think, Line of Succession, which was one of his last issues, and System Shutdown, Reconfiguration, Reboot. That's what he had planned for those issues. Well, those were his issues, I should say. The 155 to 59, those were his issues, apparently. But then, from 160 to 170, for the next 10 issues, these are the ideas, these are the stories he had planned. Now, he does go into detail about what else would have happened. Of what else would have happened, what else he had planned. He goes into more detail. He goes into more detail, and I quote, this is Ken Penders saying, talking about this is Ken Penders, and I quote, "The idea was to tease whether or not Bunny would accept based on the premise that she wasn't sure her and Antoine could lead a normal life due to her bionic parts." Basically, he's talking about the marriage here. The idea was to tease whether or not Bunny would accept Antoine's proposal based on the premise that she wasn't sure her and Antoine could lead a normal life due to her bionic parts. Eventually, events in 175, Sonic 175, would have resulted in her saying yes to the engagement, leading to a spectacular wedding into issue 200. Along the way, we would have explored the Sonic-Sally relationship in greater depth, as I would be steering to get those two together after several trials and tribulations in which neither was sure what they themselves or the other really wanted. When I resumed writing Sonic as a main feature with issue 145, I made it clear I was aiming to correct the fiasco Carl Bowler's. Okay, I want you to listen in on this. When I resumed writing Sonic as a main feature with issue 145, I made it clear I was aiming, let me check my timing, okay, I was aiming to correct the fiasco Carl Bowler's frosted up fandom with, or frosted up, basically, he said, okay, he says, I made it clear I was aiming to correct the fiasco Carl Bowler's fostered upon fandom with the infamous slap. Both Mike and I were determined to correct what many, I guess he meant, okay, both Mike and I were determined to correct what mainly was perceived at the time as the worst moment in the book's history. However, neither of us saw that getting corrected over the course of an issue or two or three. Rather, it was decided that Sonic would play the field for a while, allowing him to discover exactly why Sally was always the girl for him. One of the things that made it difficult during my resumption of being the head writer was that in some ways it was accidental. Initially, I was going to submit whatever story struck my fancy and spend the rest of my time working on other projects. So I wrote the stories published in 151 I wrote the stories published in 150 and 151. So I wrote the stories published in 150, 151 first. Then was asked to begin writing what eventually became The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, Part 1. Carl and I were supposed to alternate each successful chapter, but the plan went out the window when he and Mike couldn't work things out. Somewhere during the writing of issues 146 through 149, Mike decided he wanted stories to lead into the saga, which then resulted in me writing what eventually became Sonic 145. After finishing The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, I recall then writing Line of Successions Part 1 and 2, upon which I was then asked to write what eventually saw print in 152. What was really funny was reading Dan Duranzin's reviews at the time, because he hadn't a clue what turmoil was going on behind the scenes trying to get the book out. As I always had a policy of saying nothing in defense when a paying customer criticized my work, I just shook my head and sighed. No one knew about the rewrites that were demanded, often which made no sense, nor did I get paid for, nor the changes to the story length and format that changed at a moment's notice. What made it even funnier was that while Dan was slamming the book, sales were going up and people paid attention, I was in charge of the stories again. And people paid attention that I was in charge of the storylines again, much to the majority of the audience approval. The way I saw it, I was going to have fun writing what I did. It showed, and the audience responded. The only part I saw where I would have tread arcly is the fall of Snively. Mike had wanted me to set him up for the audience to embrace him as they never did before, only to kill him off to rattle everyone, announcing to everyone not to take the book for granted, as one would never know what to expect next. So now that I set things up and presented the roadmap, feel free to comment. Okay, so in other words, Ken Penders, in my opinion, from what I could add here, Ken Penders had a different roadmap he was going to go down had he remained on. In other words, issue 200 wouldn't have been the fight against Eggman, no. Issue 200 would have followed the tradition of other comic book weddings, and other comic book anniversary issues sometimes, and that's be celebrated with a wedding. And it sounds like from here it would have been more spectacular than 174. So it's really, really interesting to read and look and kind of wonder exactly what would have been had he remained on. So, but that is basically what would have been had Ken Penders remained on the book. So comment down below, video response if you like. I'm sorry this was in 2 parts, and I will talk to you all later. I'll provide the link in the description box.